Hello everyone and welcome to the Season 1 Episode 2 recap of Precon Recon, the show where we reconstruct Precon decks just a few cards at a time. Episodes go out live on Mythic Gaming TV's Twitch account on Fridays, and the recaps will come out the following week for anyone who might have missed out on the episode or just wants a quick reminder of what happened. Here's how the series works. We start out with a randomly assigned Commander Precon deck and play a game with it. For the next week, each player may swap out up to 5 cards, with the caveat that 3rd place gets 1 extra substitution and 4th place gets 2 extra substitutions. The next week, we'll play again and repeat this process, subbing out more and more cards until the next set comes out. At the end of the season, points will be awarded for player eliminations and final standings of the game. The first substitutions were made this week, and here's the changes the players made. With his extra 2 swaps, Chris subbed in Rafine, Scheming Seer, Medomai the Ageless, Virtus the Veiled, Bident of Thassa, Angel's Trumpet, Satoru Umezawa, and Wonder. To make room for these, he subbed out Alila Artful Provocateur, Custody Lich, Tivit, Seller of Secrets, Champion of Wits, Inkfathom Witch, Stolen Identity, and Commit Memory. Rin had 1 extra swap and chose to bring in the Ozolith, Champion of Lamholt, Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker, Selesnya Sanctuary, and Azorius Chancery. They did this taking out Skyboon Evangelist, Angelic Sleuth, Oblivion Stone, Midnight Clock, Canopy Vista, and Prairie Stream. Chad's substitutions were bringing in Balefire Dragon, Vile Entomber, Plague Reaver, Eater of Days, and Bronze Bombshell. He swapped out Turf War, Noxious Gearhulk, Wave of Rats, Thragtusk, and Inferno Titan. He also changed his commander from Henzi Toolbox Tori to Beamtown Bullies. Dylan added Kodama's Reach, Chromatic Lantern, Wayfarer's Bauble, Smothering Tithe, and Solemn Simulacrum. To do this, he took out Life of the Party, Indulge Excess, Sandworm Convergence, Outpost Siege, and Magus of the Wheel. And now, without further ado, let's get to the game. Having won the dice roll, Chris goes first. He plays a Plains and passes the turn. Rin plays an Island and passes the turn. I play a Forest and pass the turn. Chad plays Cinderglade and passes. Chris plays an Island, then taps 2 to cast an Azorius Signet before passing the turn. Rin plays Vivid Meadow, which comes into play tapped with 2 charge counters and then passes the turn. I play another Forest and pass the turn. Chad plays a Twilight Mire and passes. Chris plays a Swamp and then casts Chasm Skulker, which gets a 1/1 counter each time he draws a card and breaks into a number of 1/1 blue squids equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it when it dies. Rin plays a Forest for turn before casting Hoofprints of the Stag. I play a Thriving Grove for turn, which comes into play tapped, naming white as the color it can tap for besides green, and then I pass the turn. Chad plays a Forest for turn and then passes without casting yet again. Chris plays another Swamp for turn, then casts Rafine Scheming Seer. Chris moves to combat and decides to attack me as I knocked him out of the game last week. He swings with Chasm Skulker, which connives, sending Wonder to the graveyard. Since he controls an island, all of his creatures have flying while Wonder is in the graveyard. He also puts a 1/1 counter on Chasm Skulker from discarding a non-land off the connive trigger. I take 3 damage and Chris passes the turn. Rin plays an Island for turn, then casts Incubation Druid, after which Rin casts an Arcane Signet. Chad reminds them that Hoofprints of the Stag gets a counter from their draw step. After adding the counter, Rin passes the turn. I cast Sylvan Offering, choosing Chad to get both a 2/2 Treefolk and 2 1/1 Elf Warriors along with me. At my end step, Chad land cycles with Ash Barrens, and he searches for a mountain and puts it into his hand. On his turn, Chad plays the mountain. He then moves to combat and swings at Rin with the creatures I gave him. Rin blocks 1 of the Elf Warriors and takes 3 damage. On his post-combat main phase, Chad plays Plague Reaver, which prompts him to sacrifice each other creature he controls at his end step. He does this and then passes the turn. Chris's Chasm Skulker gets another 1/1 counter on his draw step. In his main phase, he casts his commander, Kamiz Obscura Oculus. He moves to combat and gives Chasm Skulker unblockable, despite it already having flying and no one having either a flyer or a creature with reach. He also gives Rafine double strike until the end of turn. Chasm Skulker connives 3 times, 1 from Kamiz and 2 from Rafine. From the drawing and conniving, Chris adds 6 more 1/1 counters onto Chasm Skulker. He swings at Chad, who is forced to take 12 damage. He then passes the turn. Rin gives Hoofprints of the Stag another counter from drawing for turn. They play another forest and then cast their commander, Parry the Pulverizer, giving a shield counter to Incubation Druid. After this, Rin passes the turn. Having run out of lands to play, I have to choose between using a spell on myself to get a 4th land or using it on Chris to pop his Flying Squid, which is already ballooning out of control. Realizing that Chris could easily do 13 damage to me next turn, I decide to play Path to Exile, targeting Chasm Skulker. Since it's exiled and not destroyed, Chasm Skulker also doesn't make an army of 1/1 squid tokens. Chris gets to search his library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and I get to hope that the table remembers my noble deed in the future when deciding who to target with attacks. I pass the turn. Chad plays a swamp for turn. He then moves to combat and swings at Chris for 6 with Plague Reaver. Chris takes the 6 damage. In his post-combat main phase, Chad then casts Disciple of Bolas, which prompts him to sacrifice Plague Reaver, gaining 6 life and drawing 6 cards. He discards down to hand size and passes the turn. Chris plays a Plains for turn. He then casts Felwar Stone, followed by Oscar, Rubbish Reclaimer. He untaps 3 of the lands he initially tapped to cast Oscar when he realizes it costs 1 less to cast for each mana value among cards in his graveyard. He then moves to combat, giving Rafine Unblockable and Connive from Kamiz, and Kamiz 2 Connive triggers from Rafine. He discards a land for Rafine and 2 non-land cards for Kamiz, giving Kamiz 2 +1/+1 counters. He swings at me, and I take 8 commander damage and 1 from Rafine. In his post-combat main phase, Chris casts a Soul Ring and then Angel's Trumpet. Because of Angel's Trumpet coming into play, Chris taps Oscar, Rubbish Reclaimer, and takes 1 damage. He then passes the turn. Rin plays a Plains for turn before casting Rolesk Apex Hybrid, which allows them to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature they control. They then tap Incubation Druid along with a land to cast Oracle's Vault, which can be tapped along with 2 mana to exile a card from the top of their library that can be played that turn. Rin moves to combat and swings at Chris for 7 with Parry. Chris cannot block and takes 7 commander damage from Rin. At their end step, Rin has to tap Rolex because of Angel's Trumpet and take 1 damage. They pass the turn. On my turn, I cast Selvala Explorer Return, which has a tap ability which prompts each player to reveal the top card of their library. I gain a green mana and 1 life for every non-land card revealed this way. After this, I move to combat and swing at Chris with my 3 creatures that don't have Summoning Sickness for 4 damage, which he takes. At the end of my turn, I have to tap Selvala and take 1 damage. On his turn, Chad blitzes out Mezio Mugger, which makes everyone exile the top card of their library, and Chad can cast any of those exiled cards this turn. He moves to combat and swings at Rin for 3 with Mezio Mugger and at Chris for 2 with Disciple of Bolas. They both take damage, and Chad moves to deal with the exiled cards. He plays the Exotic Orchard that Chris revealed. Chad then casts Rampant Growth to put a mountain into play tapped. At his end step, he sacrifices Mezio Mugger and draws a card. Chris immediately moves to combat on his turn. He gives Rafine Unblockable and 1 Connive trigger from Kamiz. Kamiz gets Double Strike from itself and 2 Connive triggers from Rafine. He swings at Chad with all of his creatures. Rafine gets a +1/+1 from discarding Swiftfoot Boots, which Chris immediately casts from his graveyard with Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer's ability. He discards lands for the other Connive triggers. He swings at Chad for 13 damage, which Chad takes, and then ends his turn. Rin adds a counter to Hoofprints of the Stag on their draw. They play Karn's Bastion for turn and then tap 3 and remove 4 Hoofprint counters from Hoofprints of the Stag to create a 4/4 white elemental creature token with flying. They use Oracle's Vault to exile a card from the top of their library and get a brick counter. Rin then swings at Chad with Parry and Roalesk for 11. Chad blocks Parry, who has Trample, with Disciple of Bolas and takes 10 damage. Rin then plays Family's Favor and Grateful Apparition. They both tap from Angel's Trumpet, and Rin takes 2 damage before passing the turn. I still don't draw a land for turn, so I tap Selvala, Explorer Returned, prompting everyone to reveal the top card of their library and gaining a green mana and 1 life for every non-land card revealed this way. 4 non-land cards are revealed, so I gain 4 life and then use that mana to cast Smothering Tithe. Then I cast Awakening Zone. Moving to combat, I swing at Rin with my creature tokens for 4 damage. Rin blocks the 2/2 and 1 of the 1/1 Elf Warriors and takes 1 damage. I then pass the turn. Chad does not pay the 2 for Smothering Tithe on his draw step, and I create a treasure token. He plays a Game Trail, and then reveals a forest so it comes into play untapped. He then casts Blasphemous Act, dealing 13 damage to every creature on the battlefield. Rin's Incubation Druid is the only thing to survive because of its shield counter. Chad casts Farseek to search for another swamp to put onto the battlefield tapped. Then he casts Riveteer's Confluence and puts 2 lands from his hand onto the battlefield. He takes 1 damage, draws a card, and passes the turn. Chris pays the 2 for Smothering Tithe, and then plays Sunken Hollow for turn, which comes into play untapped. Chris casts Obscura Confluence, returning 3 cards from his graveyard to his hand, including his commander, which he had let stay in the graveyard. He casts Oscar, Rubbish Reclaimer, which costs less for each mana value among cards in his graveyard. He also casts Kamiz, Obscura Oculus. At the end of his turn, he taps both and takes 2 damage from Angel's Trumpet. Finally, he passes the turn. Rin draws and gains a Hoofprint counter, then opts not to pay the 2 for the Tithe trigger, and I gain a treasure. In their main phase, Rin casts Vorel of the Hulklade. They then cast their commander, Perry, again, putting a shield counter onto him. At their end step, both creatures are tapped, and Rin loses 2 life. They pass the turn. At my upkeep, I make an Eldrazi Spawn token from Awakening Zone. I cast Sakura Tribe Elder, and then immediately sacrifice it to get a basic land, then cast Harmonize to draw 3 cards. After drawing the 3 cards, I play a land for turn and pass to Chad. Chad does not pay the Tithe trigger, and I get a treasure. On his turn, he casts his new commander, Beamtown Bullies. He swings at Rin with Beamtown Bullies, doing 4 damage, and then casts Dodgy Jalopy in his post-combat main phase. He also casts Protection Racket. Chad then passes the turn. Chris does not pay the Tithe trigger on his draw step, and I gain a treasure. Chad uses Beamtown Bully's ability and puts Plague Reaver onto the battlefield under Chris's control, goaded. Chris casts Cephalid Face Taker and attaches Swiftfoot Boots to it, giving it hexproof and haste. Chris then casts Nightmare Unmaking, exiling each creature with power greater than the number of cards he has in his hand, which is 1. This wipes the entire board except for Cephalid Face Taker because of its Swiftfoot Boots. Chris moves to combat and swings at Chad for 1 damage, which he takes before passing the turn. Rin pays the Tithe trigger before casting Evolution Sage, which allows them to proliferate whenever a land enters the battlefield. They then play a land for turn and add another counter to all of their cards with counters. Having already played a land for turn, they cannot play the land they exiled with Oracle's Vault. Rin moves to combat and swings at me for 1, which I take. They tap Evolution Sage and take 1 damage from Angel's Trumpet, and then pass the turn. At my upkeep, I create an Eldrazi Spawn from Awakening Zone. I play Mossfire Valley for turn. I tap the Eldrazi Spawn and take 1 damage from Angel's Trumpet and pass the turn. At Chad's upkeep, Protection Racket triggers. In turn order, he reveals a card from his library to each player. That player may choose to pay life equal to the card's mana value to exile it, or let Chad draw it into his hand. The first card he reveals is Aether Snap. Chris doesn't pay, and Chad puts it into his hand. The next card revealed is Commander Sphere. Rin doesn't pay, and Chad puts it into his hand. Finally, Chad reveals Tree Shaker Chimera. Looking 7 damage in the face, I opt not to pay the life, and Chad puts it into his hand as well. Chad does not pay the Tithe trigger, and I get another treasure, which I use to cast Grand Crescendo, with X as 7, making 7 green and white citizen creature tokens. Chad casts Tree Shaker Chimera, which he taps to drive the Dodgy Jalopy vehicle, which has a power of 7. He swings at Rin for 7 trample damage. Rin blocks with Vorel of the Hulklade, which dies, and they still take 3 damage. Chad then casts Jolene the Plunder Queen. At his end step, Chad taps Jolene and takes 1 damage. He passes the turn. Chris does not pay the Tithe trigger, and I gain a treasure. He plays a Swamp for turn before casting Kamiz. He swaps Swiftfoot Boots over to Kamiz, and then moving to combat, he makes Kamiz unblockable and gives Cephalid Face Taker double strike as he swings at me. Chris pays the Tithe trigger on his Connive draw. He discards a non-land, and Kamiz gets a 1/1 counter. I take 3 commander damage and 11 damage total. Chris gets a treasure from Chad's Jolene, and Chris passes the turn. Rin pays the Tithe trigger and gets another Hoofprint on their draw step. Rin removes 4 Hoofprints to get another 4/4 elemental with flying from Hoofprints of the Stag. Rin taps Oracle's Vault to exile a Flooded Grove, which they play for turn. A land enters and Rin proliferates. Rin moves to combat and swings at Chad with Evolution Sage, which gets a shield counter until it deals combat damage. Chad takes 3 damage and the shield counter goes away. Rin draws again, gaining another hoof print and paying the Tithe trigger before passing the turn. At my upkeep, I create another Eldrazi spawn. I play a Castle Ardenvale for turn, which comes into play tapped since I do not have a Plains. Then I use a treasure and the Eldrazi spawn, as well as tapping other mana to cast Gahiji Honored One. I then cast Cabaretti Charm, choosing to give my creatures +1/+1 and trample until the end of turn. This means I have 7 4/2 citizens with trample able to attack this turn. Out of spite, I swing everything at Chris for 28 damage. In response, out of spite as well, Chris blocks, killing one of my citizens before taking lethal damage and losing the game. I get a treasure token from Chad's Jolene before passing the turn. Chad's Protection Racket triggers again on his upkeep. Rin gets the option to pay 2 to prevent Chad from drawing Explore. Rin doesn't pay, and Chad draws the card. Chad then reveals a land, and I pay 0 life to prevent him from drawing the card. Chad doesn't pay the Tithe trigger on his draw step. In his main phase, Chad casts Itali Primal Storm. He also casts Aether Snap, much to my dismay. For the second week in a row, it removes all of my token creatures from the game. After that, Chad moves to combat, crewing the dodgy Jalopy with Itali, then swings all 3 of his untapped creatures at Rin for 9 damage. Rin takes the damage, and Chad creates 2 treasures from Jolene. Rin does not pay the Tithe trigger on their draw step, and I gain a treasure as they gain a hoofprint counter. I realize Chad's creatures should have gotten +2/+0 from Gahiji for attacking Rin, and Rin takes an extra 4 damage. Rin casts Steelbane Hydra, which comes in as a 2/2. Rin uses its ability to destroy Chad's Protection Racket. Rin then passes the turn. On my upkeep, I get another Eldrazi spawn from Awakening Zone. I play Seize the Spotlight, sacrificing the Eldrazi spawn to cast it. Both Chad and Rin give me a creature under the condition that I don't swing at them with their own creature. So I take Rin's 1/1 Steelbane Hydra and Chad's 8/5 Tree Shaker Chimera. I then cast Duelist's Heritage, allowing me to give an attacking creature double strike until the end of turn. I move to combat, and Chad responds by killing Gahiji with Terminate, making my attackers lose their +2/+0. I swing at Rin with Tree Shaker Chimera, and swing at Chad with the Steelbane Hydra, which I give double strike. In response, Rin plays a generous gift targeting Tree Shaker Chimera, killing it and giving me a 3/3 elephant. I draw 3 cards from Tree Shaker dying. Chad takes the 4 damage, and I play a land and cast Zerzoth Chaos Rider before passing the turn. Worth noting that I forget to return Rin's Steelbane Hydra at the end of my turn. Oops. Chad doesn't pay the Tithe trigger on his draw. On his turn, he casts Beamtown Bullies and then Mitotic Slime. Moving to combat, he crews Dodgy Jalopy with the slime and swings at Rin for 6, and swings at me for 12. We both take the damage as Chad gets 4 treasures from Jolene. Chad then passes the turn. Rin doesn't pay the Tithe trigger. Chad uses Beamtown Bullies to give Rin Giant Adaphage, a 7/7 with trample that is goated. Rin exiles a card with Oracle's Vault. Rin then casts Declaration in Stone, targeting my elephant token, and I also realized that Steelbane Hydra was supposed to be returned and give it back to Rin. Rin moves to combat and swings at me with the 7/7 and at Chad with Steelbane Hydra. I take 7 damage, and Chad, who didn't leave a blocker up, takes 1 damage and is out of the game. Rin gets a copy of Giant Adaphage as it does combat damage to me, and then gets a treasure from Jolene. In the post-combat main phase, Rin plays an Exotic Orchard, then casts Swiftfoot Boots and Devoted Druid before attaching Swiftfoot Boots to the copy of Giant Adaphage. At my upkeep, I make another Eldrazi spawn. I cast Idol of Oblivion, which I use and tap 8 along with to make a 10/10 Eldrazi token. I play Ash Barrens for turn. Then I attack with Zerzoth Chaos Rider, prompting Rin to draw a card outside their turn, which allows me to make a 1/1 Devil token which can deal 1 damage to any target when it dies. We both also draw a card and then discard a card at random. Rin blocks Zerzoth, giving me the 1/1 Devil. Rin, not having any other moves, casts Planar Outburst, destroying all non-land creatures. As my 1/1 Devil token dies, it deals 1 damage to Rin, which is enough to win me the game. And so, moving on to the Week 2 final standings. Chris is in last place with 2 4th-place finishes. Chad is in 3rd with 1 2nd-place finish and 1 3rd-place finish. Rin is in 2nd, having 1 2nd-place finish and 1 3rd-place finish, but a kill that puts them above Chad in the standings. Finally, I am once again on top with 2 1st-place finishes and 5 kills. Thanks for tuning into this Week 2 recap of Precon Recon. Once again, episodes will be going live on Twitch every Friday on the Mythic Gaming TV account, with a recap coming the following week. Link to our Twitch account will be in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time.